following day, Vikir proceeded towards the Grand Banquet Hall. After a brief journey, he reached the door, where 2 guards stood, adding a sense of tension to the surroundings. Vikir advanced towards the door, his gaze fixed upon it. After a moment's hesitation, he carefully began to push it open, heightening the already tense atmosphere. As the door creaked open, a sudden burst of light greeted his eyes. Once his vision adjusted to the brightness, he found Hugo seated in the place of honor. Next to Hugo stood his butler. To his left were his children, and to his right were his brothers. The butler announced that Vikir van Baskerville would be attending the Grand Banquet as instructed by the family's patriarch. All heads turned towards Vikir's direction. Set Le Baskerville, with dark circles under his eyes and a tired demeanor, was the first to turn and offer a friendly smile. Next, Osiris shifted his gaze, observing Vikir with a single eye. Following suit, the triplets turned their attention, their admiration evident in their gazes. Great Dane Le Baskerville followed suit, expressing a hint of surprise at Vikir's presence. Lastly, Boston Terrier turned around, resting his head on his fist as he offered a simple smile upon seeing Vikir. Vikir placed a hand over his heart and closed his eyes, expressing gratitude to Hugo for extending the invitation to the Grand Banquet. Hugo gazed at him intently, his eyes gleaming with warmth as he addressed Vikir as son and beckoned him to join the table beside his brothers. With a nod of acknowledgement, Vikir approached and took his seat, marking the commencement of the Grand Banquet. Initially, the main course, consisting of meat, was served, prompting everyone to commence their meal in silence, thereby thickening the tension in the air. The servant station behind Boston Terrier's seat observed as the atmosphere grew increasingly tense with each passing moment. Eventually, it was Boston Terrier Le Baskerville, the Pitbull Order's commander, who broke the silence. On his plate, there were 4 slices of meat, prompting him to inquire whether they were undercooked. Hugo, feeling puzzled, glanced at Boston Terrier and inquired if he disliked the meat. Boston Terrier smiled and clarified that it wasn't his intention. Gesturing with his hand, he indicated the person seated beside him, who was having difficulty cutting into the meat due to its rawness. Boston Terrier clarified to Hugo that he was referring to the meat on the adjacent plate, belonging to the person seated beside him, Great Dane Le Baskerville, commander of the Mastiff Order, who appeared somewhat irritated. In response, Great Dane questioned Boston Terrier about any further dissatisfactions. Boston Terrier met his gaze and simply stated his surprise at being served raw meat. He further remarked that it felt akin to attempting to feed his beloved nephew uncooked meat. Great Dane, in response, fixed his gaze on Vikir, acknowledging his cuteness, but reminded Boston Terrier that Vikir was also his nephew. As an uncle, it was his duty to steer his nephew toward the correct course. Boston Terrier gestured towards Vikir and questioned Great Dane why this path involved subjecting a child to a mastiff. Great Dane retorted that this path was superior to being associated with a foolish and tedious pitbull. Observing his uncles, Vikir speculated inwardly that they had indeed come with the aim of enlisting him. Among the 7 knights representing Baskerville, 2 sought to recruit him for the Pitbull and Mastiff orders. In his past life, Vikir might have welcomed such attention as they represented elite prospects with assured success. However, as he lifted a piece of meat to his mouth, he regarded his uncles with disdain, perceiving them now as mere stray dogs. Hugo interjected, halting the exchange between Great Dane and Boston Terrier. As the butler poured wine into Hugo's glass, he remarked on the younger brother's nobility and arrogance, suggesting that their affection towards the young master pleased the head of the house. Observing his father's sip from the wine glass, Vikir considered the steward's hopeful interpretation and speculated that Hugo derived pleasure from his younger brother's disputes. Boston Terrier leaned in, addressing Vikir as his dear nephew, inquiring whether he had spent the past 2 years in La Rouge at Lenoir Mountains. He further pressed, asking about the number of barbarians and monsters Vikir had slain and urging him to share his experiences in the forest. Great Dane also chimed in, expressing his interest in learning about Vikir's time in the perilous woods and his development during that period. Hugo interjected, urging his brothers to refrain from pressuring Vikir and allowing him to eat in peace. Great Dane inquired if Hugo was feeling curious, while Boston Terrier admitted that his own curiosity had driven him to return promptly for the Grand Banquet. Hugo's frustration grew evident as he demanded that they cease their probing questions. Great Dane and Boston Terrier sensed the weight of their older brother's words, feeling the immense pressure emanating from him. Hugo rose from his chair, exuding a menacing aura, and holding a piece of meat with his fork, he reiterated his dislike for having to repeat himself. This stern warning prompted both brothers to quiet down and cease their conversation. However, at that moment, Vikir rose from his chair, his gaze fixed on his two uncles. He addressed the gathering, stating that proving his accomplishments wasn't a difficult task. Observing Vikir's actions, Hugo directed his attention towards him, reminding him of the long journey he had undertaken. He questioned whether it wouldn't be exhausting for Vikir to attend the gathering at the drill hall. Turning to Hugo, Vikir assured him that he was perfectly fine. Then he gestured towards the table, emphasizing that he could demonstrate his abilities at any moment and in any setting. He posed a rhetorical question to the gathering, asking whether everyday life wasn't essentially an extension of training. As he spoke, he drew the attention of his uncle, Boston Terrier, and pointed out the excessive amount of wine in his glass. Next, he turned his focus to his uncle, Great Dane, and remarked that his steak was not cooked to perfection, leaving both surprised and slightly perplexed. With his hand still resting on the table, he began to concentrate intently. After a few moments, a faint aura of mana emanated from his fingertip. Directing this mana towards the wine glass and the steak plate, Vikir ensured that the steak was cooked to perfection and the wine glass was filled with precisely the right amount of wine. Great Dane skewered a piece of meat with his fork and was astounded to find it cooked to perfection. Meanwhile, Boston Terrier picked up the wine glass and chuckled with delight upon noticing the precise amount of wine it contained. Addressing everyone, Boston Terrier revealed that Vikir had employed mana to cook the meat and warm the wine when he placed his hand on the table. At 17 years old, he found himself achieving the intermediate level of graduation, a milestone typically attained at 33. Reflecting on this, he mused that his older brother Hugo must feel immense pride in having a son who had mastered these techniques at such a young age. Meanwhile, Hugo merely sipped from his wine glass, silently absorbing the praise bestowed upon his son by his younger brother. Vikir glanced at the triplets, finding it peculiar that his abilities as a mid-rank graduate had seemingly become public knowledge. 2 years prior, he had believed that only a select few were aware, particularly after his confrontation with Madame. Now, observing the three boys gazing at him with admiration, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were privy to his capabilities. Vikir couldn't help but ponder why the triplets hadn't disclosed his abilities to anyone. Just then, he was interrupted by someone addressing him as "little brother," offering commendation for his diligent efforts. It was Osiris Le Baskerville, the family's eldest son and first in line for succession. With his wine glass in hand, Osiris praised Vikir for his achievements and encouraged him to persist in his endeavors in the days ahead. Vikir, feeling a bit puzzled, expressed gratitude to his elder brother Osiris, but couldn't shake off his confusion regarding the unexpected praise. As the first successor in line for the Baskerville family and bearing a striking resemblance to Hugo, Osiris's commendation left Vikir contemplating whether he was being evaluated by him. Another figure, who had just set down his wine glass on the table, remarked to the gathering about the uncommon sight of the elder brother commending his younger sibling. This individual was Set Le Baskerville, next in line for succession and the second eldest son of the Baskerville family. His gaze shifted towards Vikir as he disclosed that it was the first instance he had witnessed Osiris praising someone with such genuine delight. Set Le Baskerville continued, noting to Vikir that he had a poker face much like his brother Osiris. He then inquired if Vikir happened to be acquainted with his older siblings. Vikir, appearing somewhat puzzled, affirmed that he was indeed familiar with his brothers. Set Le Baskerville regarded him with a cheerful smile, expressing his delight that his younger brother recognized him. He proceeded to recount that due to his frailty, he often remained confined to the medical wing or the isolation training hall. Additionally, he mentioned that his training facility was situated in close proximity to Underdog, where Vikir served as deputy consul. With intentions to visit, he inquired whether Vikir would be willing to share his experiences from the dense forests. Vikir's gaze drifted into the void as he contemplated how Set's cheerful demeanor, contrasting starkly with the typical Baskerville disposition, remained unchanged. Recalling the past, Vikir remembered serving alongside Set during the fall, sharing moments of camaraderie amidst the turmoil of battle. In those tumultuous times, Set was the sole source of solace for the fallen Bloodhounds, offering comfort amid the chaos. Amidst the blood-soaked chaos of the battlefield, Set had extended comfort to Vikir, who wandered amidst the carnage. Despite Vikir's false accusations, Set stood steadfastly by his side, offering unwavering support until the very end. With a warm smile, Set expressed his desire to be under Vikir's care. Set was the sole individual Vikir had hoped to encounter at the banquet. In an instant, Vikir's countenance shifted as he detected a foul odor permeating the air, a scent reminiscent of the demonic presence he had encountered during the fall. This putrid smell, discernible only to him, signaled the presence of a demon concealed among the attendees of the Grand Banquet. Surveying the room, Vikir sought the source of this noxious stench. Closing his eyes momentarily, he reopened them and fixed his gaze upon a figure, Set, holding a wine glass, yet adorned with demonic hands. Set met Vikir's gaze with a smile, innocently inquiring, "Is there something you need?" As Vikir and Set conversed, Vikir noticed Set's adeptness at engaging in conversation with everyone around him, effortlessly lightening the mood and appearing at ease. Even as a maid poured wine into Set's glass, he took the opportunity to exchange pleasantries with her, asking about her well-being. Vikir found it surprising that Set not only conversed with his siblings, but also with the servants, displaying a remarkable social grace and inclusivity. Observing Set closely with one eye, Vikir couldn't shake the feeling that this was the same person he had known before his regression. The unsettling realization dawned on him that the individual he had once trusted the most now emitted the foul stench of demons. Set, holding his glass with one hand, directed his gaze towards Vikir and casually remarked that during his absence, he had heard about Vikir's appointment as deputy consul of Underdog City. Set continued, mentioning that he had heard about the citizens' appreciation for Vikir, noting that they had even begun protesting for him to assume the position permanently. Expressing his eagerness to collaborate upon his return to the role of deputy consul, Set awaited Vikir's response, who, in turn, gazed back silently, withholding any immediate reply. With 3 fingers delicately holding his wine glass, Vikir extended it towards Set's for a toast. Set smiled, observing Vikir's gesture before Vikir expressed his own eagerness to collaborate. Set's delight was evident as they clinked their glasses together in a toast, with Set expressing his assurance that Vikir would be under his care. Upon finishing the toast, Vikir raised his wine glass closer to his eye, causing a subtle tension to linger in the air. He fixed his gaze on the reflection within the glass. As he peered into it, he spotted Osiris seated in his armchair. Yet, when he shifted his attention to Set's chair, he found it vacant. In that moment, Vikir realized something unsettling. He couldn't see his own reflection in the wine glass. As Vikir observed the peculiar absence of Set's reflection, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Could Set be deceased, his body now possessed by a demon? His gaze shifted to the others seated at the table, contemplating whether he should disclose his suspicions about Set's true nature. Meanwhile, Set savored his wine, oblivious to Vikir's scrutiny. As Vikir raised his own glass to his lips, his eyes locked intently on Set. He swiftly reconsidered his decision, opting against disclosing Set's true nature to the table's occupants. Vikir reasoned that such a revelation would likely prompt his father and the others to demand concrete evidence. Instead, he resolved to bide his time, waiting until after the Grand Banquet concluded to gather sufficient evidence to substantiate his accusation against Set as a demon. Set, with an amiable smile, inquired about Vikir's choice of order to join. However, Vikir found the suffocating odor emanating from Set's breath rather discomforting. With closed eyes and a smile, Set reminisced about his youthful admiration for the Doberman Order's uniform. Just as their conversation continued, Osiris interjected, reminding Set that they had yet to finish their meal. As Osiris proceeded to clear the table of leftover food with the tablecloth, Set, feeling somewhat uneasy upon hearing his brother's words, opted to remain silent to avoid further provocation. Vikir shifted his gaze to Osiris and silently appreciated the relief from the discomfort caused by Set's breath. Meanwhile, Hugo directed his attention to Vikir and inquired about the quality of the food. Meeting Hugo's gaze, Vikir responded positively, acknowledging the deliciousness of the meal. Pleased with Vikir's response, Hugo expressed his happiness that Vikir was enjoying the culinary offerings. Hugo then mentioned that he had something to discuss and suggested that now that they were in the main house, Vikir should visit his office. Vikir considered Hugo's words for a moment before acknowledging his request. Later that night, after the conclusion of the Grand Banquet dinner, he departed from the main house. As he walked away from the house, Vikir let out a sigh, feeling a bit weary after the 5-hour dinner. It had been quite an ordeal for him, dining with those individuals. Throughout the meal, he learned that the official documents for the Academy participants had arrived at Baskerville. It didn't take Vikir long to realize that Hugo had summoned him regarding his enrollment in the Academy. Lost in his thoughts, he suddenly noticed a figure atop the main house, glaring down at him. Before he could react, the figure seized the opportunity to launch a swift and powerful sword attack, sending a red aura hurtling towards him. Much to his surprise, Vikir swiftly sensed the impending attack, and as he turned to face it, he recognized it as the 6th technique of the Baskerville family. This realization left him pondering whether he could overcome it. Drawing his sword, he reflected on his current skill level, realizing that as a mid-grade graduator, he might be limited in his ability to surpass it. With determination, he swiftly employed the 4th Baskerville technique, executing precise and forceful sword strikes aimed at the incoming attack. As his cuts began to weaken the assault, he readied himself to absorb the remaining aura using the blessing of the river Styx and his own aura. However, much to his surprise, just before the attack could make contact, it inexplicably dissipated into thin air. Perplexed, Vikir turned his gaze toward the rooftop of the main house, where he caught sight of the man's leg who initiated the attack. A hearty laughter echoed from the figure. To his surprise, it was none other than Boston Terrier Le Baskerville himself. Sporting a grin, Boston Terrier elucidated to Vikir that there existed a 2-level disparity between their techniques. Nonetheless, Vikir was considerably taken aback by the fact that he had managed to withstand the assault. Boston Terrier commended Vikir for displaying true maturity. With a swift descent from the rooftop of the main house to the ground, he caused the flooring to crack upon impact. Voicing his certainty aloud, he inquired of Dane whether he shared the same sentiment. Dane materialized behind Vikir, his gaze fixed on Boston Terrier's actions within the main house. He rebuked Boston Terrier, condemning such behavior as barbaric. Directing his attention to Boston Terrier, he demanded an explanation for his attempt on his cherished nephew's life. Dane cautioned that should Hugo discover this treachery, Boston Terrier would, at the very least, face several months of probation as punishment. With a grin, Boston Terrier countered Dane's accusations, questioning how he could doubt the affection an uncle holds for his nephew. He disclosed that he deliberately tailored the attack to dissipate before reaching Vikir, ensuring his safety. Boston Terrier then questioned Dane's motives, urging him to focus on his own endeavors rather than meddling in the affairs of the Pitbulls. As their argument intensified, Dane corrected Boston Terrier, asserting that Vikir belonged to the Mastiffs, not the Pitbulls. He adamantly refused to let his cherished nephew become involved with a group of ruffians. Meanwhile, Vikir calmly sheathed his sword, observing the escalating tension between Dane and Boston Terrier. Boston Terrier ridiculed Dane, reminding him of a past incident where Dane begged for help over a minor wound on his belly. Dane fired back, suggesting that Pitbulls were so muscular that they lacked the belly skin to tear. Tensions escalated as both men drew their swords. Boston Terrier proposed a duel, with the victor gaining custody of Vikir and determining his allegiance. Without hesitation, Dane accepted the duel, driven by his desire for the best outcome for his nephew. Seeing the impending clash between his uncles, Vikir decided to walk away, finding their squabble rather irritating. As he strolled towards the bridge linking the main house to Underdog City, he pondered over Boston Terrier's earlier attack, realizing it hadn't been as forceful as expected. He considered the most potent attack among the 7 counts to be the 6th technique wielded by the top-ranking Baskerville graduate. Although he held the same ranking, he was well versed in the 7th technique and possessed knowledge of utilizing the blessings of the Styx River and the demonic sword Beelzebub. With a grin etched on his face, tinged with a hint of menace, he pondered how these techniques empowered him to confront 2 of the counts simultaneously. Upon reaching the other side of the bridge, Vikir was greeted by 3 individuals, high bro, middle bro, and low bro, whose intense gazes immediately put him on edge, casting a palpable tension in the air. After a few moments, each of them began to draw their swords with deliberate intent. Vikir's heart sank as he observed this unfolding. His eyes flashed with anger, realizing they were fully aware of the power dynamics at play. Frustration welled up within him as he concluded that they were prepared to engage in combat despite the vast gap in their abilities compared to his own. Feeling cornered and threatened by their defiance, he resolved that he had no recourse but to quell the aggression of these insolent bloodhounds who dared to challenge him. To his astonishment, instead of initiating a confrontation, high bro, middle bro, and low bro dropped to their knees, bowed their heads, and set their swords at their feet. Vikir stood in disbelief at their unexpected gesture. As he observed high bro, he noticed the vulnerable position they assumed, a stance known as the promise. In this stance, a single push could cause their swords to pierce through their own feet, signifying their sincere commitment and vulnerability. Vikir was taken aback by their unexpected gesture. He inquired of high bro, middle bro, and low bro the reason behind their actions. The 3 knights fixed their gaze upon him and confessed that they had come to settle their debts. High bro elaborated, revealing that ever since Vikir had confronted him at the age of 9, a sense of fear had lingered within him. Middle bro shared that his recognition of Vikir began during the hunt for Cerberus. Low bro chimed in, expressing his amazement at Vikir's ability to slay the troll. The trio explained that witnessing Vikir confront such formidable foes instilled admiration and reverence within them. They recounted a moment of peril when they narrowly essayed death, prompting them to unite and pledge allegiance to Vikir. They vowed to become Vikir's loyal servants, dubbing themselves the 3 Spears of Vikir van Baskerville. They humbly implored Vikir to accept their loyalty and become their master. Vikir was taken aback by their unexpected devotion. Before regressing, Vikir remembered that they were the ones who apprehended him and later fled when he was falsely accused. Known as Hugo's 3 Spears, they were merely carrying out orders as bloodhounds. Yet, despite their roles, Vikir's sentiments lingered. He passed by the trio without uttering a word, leaving high bro, middle bro, and low bro disheartened. However, much to everyone's astonishment, as he continued walking, Vikir remarked that he had no use for such promises. He added that he was fatigued and suggested they discuss the matter later. Despite harboring unforgiving sentiments towards them, Vikir intended to manipulate them to serve his revenge scheme. The trio, with smiles on their faces, agreed to keep their newfound alliance and their plans concealed. As Vikir distanced himself from them, they assured him of their understanding. Silently, Vikir continued on his way, pondering the unexpected variable of Set's possession by demons. He resolved to swiftly task Cindy Wendy with investigating the matter, realizing that regardless of the circumstances, he must eliminate the demon. Vikir fixed his gaze on Hugo's office ahead, knowing there was something crucial he needed to address before dealing with the demon. Gathering his resolve, he entered Hugo's office, uttering words that ignited fury within him. Hugo demanded clarification, his rage permeating the room and unnerving even the butler. As Hugo pressed Vikir to repeat his statement, Vikir maintained his composure, taking a step closer. He broached the topic of Roxana, his late first wife, and their daughter Penelope. Locking eyes with Hugo, Vikir requested a discussion about Penelope. Hugo's reaction was immediate and intense, his gaze turning deadly as he demanded to know how Vikir was aware of Penelope's name. Vikir met Hugo's gaze unwaveringly, his eyes gleaming with determination. In that moment, he realized that this was merely the inception of his intricate plan for vengeance. As the first light of dawn streamed through the windows of Hugo's office, illuminating the room, he produced an envelope and placed it deliberately on the table before Vikir. With a solemn tone, he disclosed that they had recently received a notice from the Academy. With both hands cradling the envelope, Vikir absorbed the contents of the notice while Hugo intertwined his fingers, observing his son intently. Seizing the moment, he broached the topic of their prior agreement concerning Vikir's enrollment in the Academy. The letter, emanating from Colosseo, was tailored for the students of Class 20. As Vikir delved into the contents of the notice, he realized his earlier assumption about the purpose of Hugo's summons was accurate. It indeed pertained to his admission to the Academy. Colosseo Academy stood as the paramount educational establishment under the aegis of the Great Rock Empire. Graduating from this prestigious institution guaranteed entry into the elite course at the Imperial Palace or potentially an upper-tier assignment. In his past life, Vikir served as a servant for the triplets at the Academy. During that time, he bore multiple scars on his face and walked with a limp, leading to his dismissal by the Academy's nobles. However, since regressing, those painful memories no longer troubled him. Lost in contemplation, Vikir was interrupted by Hugo's inquiry about the welfare of the triplets, whom he had entrusted to accompany Vikir. Hugo further inquired if there were any other individuals Vikir wished to bring along to the Academy. Vikir met Hugo's gaze and requested permission to pose a question of his own. He recounted an event from 2 years prior when his disappearance prompted the family head to receive a letter promising significant benefits from the Morg family, including a reward specifically designated for Vikir. Inquiring about the promised reward, Vikir sought confirmation from his father regarding the matter. Hugo, wearing a smile, affirmed the truth of the reward and inquired if Vikir had any specific desires in mind. Surprisingly, Vikir expressed his wish for a simple reward, a story from his father. Hugo, taken aback by the modest request, showed signs of confusion at his son's unexpected choice. Filled with curiosity, Hugo inquired about the type of story Vikir wished to hear. Upon Hugo's agreement to tell a story as a reward, Vikir considered it as tacit approval to proceed with his inquiry. Approaching Hugo's table, Vikir expressed his interest in learning about Mrs. Roxana and Miss Penelope. The sudden mention of these names caused a dramatic shift in the butler's expression, reflecting his disbelief at Vikir's request. Similarly, Hugo's demeanor altered as he sought clarification from Vikir regarding what he had just heard. With a steady gaze, Vikir reiterated his request, mentioning once more the late Mrs. Roxana, his first wife, and their daughter. Vikir persisted, asking Hugo once more if he could discuss Miss Penelope. At the mention of Penelope's name, Hugo's fists clenched, and his expression darkened with anger. He demanded to know how Vikir was privy to Penelope's name, his tone sharp with suspicion. With an intense glare, Hugo questioned Vikir's motives, cautioning him against pursuing the matter further if it was merely out of curiosity. Despite the mounting tension, Vikir remained composed, closing his eyes briefly and placing a hand over his heart. In a steady voice, he explained that he required Hugo's answer before divulging the reason behind his inquiry. Hugo's anger simmered, evident in his escalating demeanor. Just as his frustration neared its breaking point, Vikir assured him that his motive was not driven by idle curiosity and implored Hugo to trust him. As Vikir made his way to Hugo's office accompanied by Barrymore the butler, he knew that revealing Pamelian's existence to Hugo required disclosing crucial information about his past. This included Hugo's first wife, whom he had met through an arranged marriage, and his eldest daughter who had been abducted by barbarians. These were sensitive matters that Vikir needed to approach with care. During their journey, Vikir shared with Barrymore a tale that seemed almost fantastical, a story fraught with disbelief. Despite the incredulity of Vikir's narrative, Barrymore conveyed that Hugo was a man who harbored deep affection for his family. This revelation surprised Vikir, who had assumed that few Baskervilles held such sentiments towards Hugo. Barrymore further revealed that the patriarch still held a fondness for his first wife, Mrs. Baskerville. Despite Barrymore's tale of Hugo's enduring affection for Roxana, Vikir couldn't solely rely on this anecdote to introduce Pamelian to Hugo. He needed concrete confirmation himself. As they awaited Hugo's response, a heavy silence settled over them, thickening the tension in the room. Eventually, Hugo broke the silence. With a solemn expression and a hand placed over his heart, Hugo revealed to Vikir that Roxana had been his true love, cherished deeply with all his being. Penelope, their daughter, held an irreplaceable position as his most treasured possession. Vikir's reaction oscillated between surprise and confusion. The utterance of the word love from his father's lips left him pondering its significance. Hugo leaned forward, his elbows finding support on the table as his fingers intertwined. With a contemplative gaze fixed on the floor, he opened up to Vikir, recounting the origins of his relationship with Roxana. It wasn't a typical tale of an arranged marriage. Roxana, a commoner with little to her name, had captured his heart. Despite the passage of years, Hugo vividly recalled the day they first met, their eyes meeting amidst the bustling streets of the city, and an instant connection sparking between them. Vikir listened intently, realizing that Hugo was beginning from the very genesis of their love story. Hugo continued, describing the challenges they faced, how Roxana had initially sought to distance herself due to her modest background, and how he had willingly forsaken everything to be with her. Hugo's voice carried a somber tone as he delved deeper into their tumultuous journey. He revealed that, in his devotion to Roxana, he was prepared to sacrifice everything, even his very soul. But Vikir hadn't come to hear just any love story. He politely thanked his father for sharing but requested to fast forward to the part where Penelope entered the narrative. Before Vikir could finish his request, Hugo interjected, his determination to tell their story evident. He recounted how their love was continuously tested, as they found themselves pursued by the Baskerville family, determined to tear them apart. To safeguard Roxana, Hugo fought tooth and nail, navigating a treacherous path where their love seemed cursed. Despite countless trials and moments of despair, their bond endured, sustained by the power of their shared love. As Hugo continued recounting their love story, he revealed that despite the initial challenges, they managed to overcome their parents' objections and were married. Barrymore, visibly moved by the tale, removed his glasses to wipe away tears. Through their union, Penelope, his cherished wife and beloved daughter, came into the world. These were individuals Hugo was determined to protect, as they were the fruit of his hard-won battles. However, tragedy struck when Roxana's health declined rapidly after giving birth. Despite her valiant struggle, she ultimately succumbed to her illness, leaving behind a young Penelope. Yet, even in the face of adversity, Penelope grew into a bright and charming young woman. With her father's resilient mindset and her mother's nurturing spirit, Penelope grew up surrounded by the love of the Baskervilles. Despite the loss of his wife, Hugo found solace in Penelope's well-being, cherishing her happiness above all else. However, his contentment was shattered by a tragic incident. Recalling the event, Hugo's anger surged uncontrollably, emanating in a menacing aura that cracked the armchair under his grip. Penelope, who had ventured out for a stroll, was abducted by the Rococo tribe. Hugo's fury intensified as he grappled with the mystery of how the barbarians breached Baskerville territory and captured his daughter, a question that had plagued him since that fateful day. As Hugo recounted the ongoing mystery surrounding Penelope's disappearance, Vikir remained silent, absorbing his father's words. Driven by the desperate search for his daughter, Hugo justified the expansion of the Empire's territories, aggressively subjugating the barbarian tribes suspected of her abduction. Recognizing the monumental challenge ahead, Hugo strategically bolstered his alliances through arranged marriages, rapidly expanding his progeny. Decades passed, and Hugo's relentless pursuit culminated in the establishment of a formidable dynasty, the Iron Blood Baskerville family, renowned throughout the region for its power and influence. As Hugo expressed his grief over the loss of his daughter and wife, Vikir observed the turmoil in his father's demeanor. Despite Hugo's stoic exterior and his strategic pursuits for the family and the Empire's glory, Vikir sensed the underlying pain of losing his beloved family. Though Vikir glimpsed the vulnerability behind Hugo's facade, he couldn't help but wonder if it truly mattered. After all, even the most hardened villains often had poignant backstories, but their actions in the present were what defined them. As Vikir listened to Hugo's account, he couldn't shake off the contempt he felt towards his father for his ruthless actions and the countless lives sacrificed in his pursuit of power. Yet, amidst his disdain, Vikir couldn't deny the significance of Roxana and Penelope in Hugo's life. After Hugo concluded his narrative, his piercing gaze and the palpable tension in the air signaled his impatience for Vikir's explanation. Without flinching, Vikir retrieved a golden pendant from his pocket. Approaching Hugo's desk, Vikir gently placed the pendant upon it, asking if he could inspect it. As Hugo examined the pendant, a sense of recognition dawned upon him. Peering closely, he realized it was the very pendant he had crafted for Roxana, and the same one Penelope had worn before her abduction by the barbarians. Opening the locket, Hugo beheld a photograph of himself, Roxana, and their beloved daughter, Penelope. The gravity of the moment hung heavy in the air as Hugo studied the image intently. Sensing the tension, Vikir began to step back from the table, posing a question that further heightened the atmosphere. What would you do if Miss Penelope's successor were alive? Upon hearing these startling words, both Hugo and Barrymore were left speechless, their expressions betraying their shock. As Vikir made his way towards the door, Hugo's curiosity piqued, demanding to know what Vikir meant by his cryptic statement. Turning to face Hugo directly, Vikir revealed the truth. The successor he spoke of was none other than Miss Penelope's daughter. In clearer terms, Hugo himself had a granddaughter. Before further discussion could ensue, the door swung open, admitting another unexpected presence into Hugo's office. The newcomer, addressing Vikir as Uncle, caused Hugo's astonishment to deepen. Standing before them was none other than Pamelian, accompanied by Chihuahua, who had waited just outside the door. She clutched Vikir's clothes tightly, reminding him that she had patiently waited as he had instructed. With a mixture of emotions, she glanced at Hugo before wrapping her arms around Vikir's leg in a tight embrace. Sensing the weight of the moment, Vikir confessed to Hugo that he had deceived him. He proceeded to unravel the truth, recounting his encounter with a girl in the Rococo tribe's territory during his time in the forest. This girl, he explained, referred to the individual who had bestowed upon her the very pendant that Hugo now held in his hands as mother. Hugo's disbelief was palpable as he processed this revelation, his gaze shifting between the pendant and Pamelian. Tremors shook him as he struggled to comprehend the implications of Vikir's words. As Vikir observed the unfolding scene, a sense of satisfaction washed over him, relishing in Hugo's evident confusion. Hugo's trembling form rose from his seat, prompting Vikir to ponder the complexity of Pamelian's identity, a blend of someone Hugo cherished and something he abhorred. Drawing closer to Pamelian, Vikir's scrutiny added to the palpable tension in the room. Contemplating whether the formidable Hugo could maintain composure in the face of his granddaughter, Vikir awaited his reaction. Pamelian, meeting Hugo's gaze, felt a wave of fear wash over her, causing her to tremble. With an aura brimming with intensity, Hugo directed a pointed question at Vikir, inquiring if Pamelian's presence in Rococo implied she was the offspring of his daughter and a barbarian. With a penetrating gaze, Vikir affirmed Hugo's assumption, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Hugo's reaction was visceral, a mixture of anger and despair causing tremors to course through his body. Slowly extending his hand toward Pamelian's head, Hugo's actions betrayed his inner turmoil. Meanwhile, Vikir observed with a sense of anticipation, knowing that this moment marked the beginning of his revenge. Hours later, in the main house garden, Vikir and Osiris encountered Barrymore, their expressions reflecting the shock of what they beheld. Before them sat Pamelian on Hugo's lap, playfully tugging at his beard. Amused, Hugo questioned her antics, to which she cheekily replied, addressing him as her grandfather and teasing him about his unkempt beard. Upon hearing Pamelian address him as grandfather, Hugo was taken aback, questioning if he had heard correctly. Vikir remained silent, observing the unfolding scene, while Osiris stepped in to elucidate that despite his long years, this was the first time he felt such astonishment. Barrymore adjusted his glasses, admitting that despite his age, he found himself sharing Osiris's sentiments. As Vikir observed Hugo and Pamelian, he couldn't help but wonder about the sudden change in the Hugo he knew. Meanwhile, Pamelian innocently enjoyed her lollipop, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Hugo covered his face with his hand, overwhelmed by the realization that he was now a grandfather. Tears welled up in his eyes as he contemplated the significance of being addressed with such familial reverence. Witnessing Hugo's emotional display, Vikir found himself caught off guard, his confusion mingling with surprise. He glanced down at the floor, feeling the onset of sweat and a growing sense of concern as he pondered the reason behind Hugo Baskerville's poignant expression.